So overall challenges when it comes to uh, our approach or these kind of approaches is that there are two main domains. One is the processor element architectures, wherein you actually have to identify generic functions across multiple protocols, then design efficient hardware for supporting them. For example, an interviewer that you support Wi-Fi, WiMAX, so on and so forth, and you should design that in a flexible manner and still efficient. So which was Mohit's work when he designed this kind of processing element architectures. The other area is the actual platform, where you will have to integrate these heterogeneous processing elements into a common platform that can be programmed in a uniform manner and can support programmability in an efficient way. So that is the area of this work basically, and designing of. In our case, we are doing this OS-like support in hardware, so design of those kind of mechanisms in hardware. So focus of this work is coming up with an SOC organization which is between fully distributed and a fully centralized approach, because we wanted to have some kind of a balance between scalability and hardware overhead. And for that, we use some kind of distributed shared task managers. I'll discuss all these things as we move on further. The other thing is the actual design of the hardware-based task manager, which is going to provide us the OS-like support, all the scheduling and those kind of things. So, and plus it is a shared one, meaning it is going to be used by multiple processing elements, and still we have to maintain some kind of performance. So we had to design a pipeline architecture and so on and so forth. Okay, so now coming to virtual flow pipelining, which is our architectural framework and programming model. So discussing that, what is our programming model? It is basically that the wireless protocol flow will be broken up into tasks, course-grade tasks, and each of these tasks is now going to be, you can say, assigned to a particular processing element, and you define the flow of these tasks, which actually forms like a system-level program. Okay, so this is the protocol application level programming, higher level programming, where you have, this is like at the system level, and at every function, for every processing engine, you can program multiple functions that the processing element can do. For example, encoding, you can have 1x2 encoding, 3x4, so on and so forth, programmed on the.
So that's one hardware block which you can program ASCII to do any one of them.
Yes.
Depending on higher level control information.
Yes. And the actual stitching of all these tasks together is what is the system level program, what we call as a virtual flow.
Okay.
And I'll discuss why it is virtual. And so, and another unique thing is that these different tasks can actually be, rather they are implemented by a very heterogeneous type of processing elements. Like, in fact, one of them could be just a hardware accelerator. The other could be an application-specific processor. But this programming model treats all of them in a uniform manner. Okay.
Who does the scheduling?
The schedule.
That's done in a higher level, software level.
No, actually, the scheduling is, you can say, it is provisioned at when the program is when this flow is being programmed. Okay, so you assign some kind of bandwidth requirements for the flow for every task. Then you assign some kind of priorities. But actual enforcement is done at runtime. Our scheduler is in hardware and it does this at runtime. And why? Because your load can vary. Like the hardware that we are building does not necessarily just have to support one wireless protocol at a time. It could actually sometimes support 2, sometimes support 4. So the load is going to vary. So you need runtime or dynamic scheduling to handle this kind of flow.
Yeah. Okay.
When you say scheduling, what is the schedule?
The tasks, the constituent tasks.
So like sometimes there'll be something where you're running this box that runs.
Yes. So actually there could be.
Sometimes you'll be doing IFMC in your system.
No, see, there could be one. This is one example flow. Okay. You could have another similar flow being simultaneously executed. Okay, maybe I should go to the next slide. So you could have two flows which are simultaneously being executed. Now, for example, you can see the modulator is being shared. Like you have a requirement for the modulator in both the this thing. So which one to execute first? And,
so you give the modulator to flow 1 or to flow 2.
Yeah, that's what. That's what is being scheduled, and that depends on how much priority you are associating with each of these, or you can assign them some kind of fixed bandwidth and things like that. So actually, I'm not going to get into those scheduling policy details and all those because
No, I understand, that's a different domain, but let me ask you this, so that I understand it. Your step 2 in protocol 2 and step 3 in protocol 1 is
Yes.
one piece of hardware.
yes, the modulator here. You can see.
Okay, oh, I see. So, okay.
So these are essentially virtual flows.
So how do you make sure it is done in a sequence?
That's what. All this is managed by the system controller.
Okay.
All these are executed in a
So
pipeline
that is
fashion.
the schedule. That is the schedule. That's what you are
Yes,
saying.
I come to in the next slide as well. So, so as I mentioned, virtual flows. Virtual flows are nothing but system-level programs, which essentially describe these protocol flows. So, what they do is that they are going to describe the sequence of all the tasks and the mapping of these functions into actual tasks on the processing engines. Okay, and we call these as yeah.
Usually, how much capacity do you have? Concurrency as like how many
Flows?
Yeah, how many flows?
Okay, see, that will be pretty much dependent on how much hardware we have. So that depends on how many processing engines you have, and so on and so forth.
But if you are doing pipelining,
Mhm.
it's not solely limited just by.
Okay, then it depends on how big your your task size is, like how much data you're processing at one time. It depends. Like there are many considerations, and we have features to like knobs to tweak all these things. Like for example, we have a feature called chunking, where we can actually break up the big packet into much smaller packets, and each of the processing engines then operates on a smaller packet, so you can effectively have more sharing
Right.
and still meet the latency requirements as well. So there is no hard number as such that these many flows. So it
Yeah, so what he's saying is that he's gonna describe the infrastructure.
Okay.
We would need another student who would,
I
start running a bunch of like applications, provide flows and
All right.
see.
There was actually one thing before, Madura and Yash, all the parallel flows and how many flows it can support.
I have some of
Yeah.
those.
But it's all dependent really on the underlying processing engine that you're sharing.
Okay. So moving forward, so these are like virtual flow pipelines. That's because the virtual flows, the constituent tasks in the virtual flows are executed in a pipeline fashion. So you can see that the same two flows that we discussed in the previous slide, they are happening in a pipeline fashion. The unique thing about these pipelines is that it is not like some hardware, regular hardware pipeline, which is very rigid and has a fixed latency and fixed sequence. Here, the pipeline is flexible, meaning based on how many processing engines your flow needs, you can have different latency. Each, you can have a different sequence for each of the flows depending on what the requirement is. It's not a rigid pipeline because it is defined by the sequence of units. And you can also define what each stage does, like what every stage is going to do. So for example, here the encoder is being used in pipeline fashion. And that's all. And that's how these two flows will also be happening in parallel. Excuse me.
And your pipeline is unidirectional. In other words, you would never see a situation
It is directed asynchronous.
Yeah, correct. Like, I mean, in a typical processor, what happens sometimes?
And wireless protocols do not have
Do not have unpredictable things that you have to go back and.
Okay, so getting a top level view of this whole thing, a layered radio architecture. So that's what whatever I explained in one slide, we can have it. So it's like the higher application layer could be running multiple wireless protocols. Whenever a new protocol is suppose required, it is programmed through a uniform interface, and although the programming happens at you can say provision time when these sessions are being provisioned, but the actual execution of these virtual flows is going to happen at runtime, and this is what we are going to be implementing in hardware. Okay, and we need it in runtime because, as I explained earlier, the load can be dynamic, and that's why you need to make runtime decisions. So And at the processing layer, there will be these processing engines which actually do the data processing, but they do it with a very myopic view or a very narrow view. They don't even have the notion of flows. It's all managed at the task management layer. He just delegates tasks down here and gets them done.
So the top level stuff that is implemented in software,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
From where it becomes hardware?
From here on it becomes hardware.
From there down.
So all this is getting programmed into hardware. Okay, so actually programming these virtual flows, how do we go about that? So basically, whenever a system programmer has to program a virtual flow, there are two elements involved. One is actually defining functionality of the flow, and the other is the performance. So for defining the functionality, we have structures called as task descriptors, where you have to describe the task operation. So basically, what is the command that needs to be performed? Like for example, if it is like FFT, what kind of FFT? 256.FFT, 64, so on and so forth. Then where the data actually resides for doing this, and those things are dynamically updated as well. I'll discuss on that further. The second thing is the actual sequence of tasks. So for this particular task, who are the consumers? And I mentioned potential consumers here because the actual consumer could depend on what the result of the processing is. So this is effectively like resolving an if-else kind of statement. Like for example, if you have a CRC, if the CRC fails, you have some consumer, if it passes some other consumer. So that is like resolving a control dependency, and we are doing it in hardware, which the Germany people were still doing in software. And then task synchronization. If there is some kind of forking or joining of tasks, then in that case you need to have some kind of synchronization that the consumer only begins after all its dependencies have been resolved, and things like those. From performance point of view, how much bandwidth do you want to associate with this flow? What is the priority? So our scheduling policy has got like you can have some kind of dedicated bandwidth association with flows, or you can do it in some kind of a best effort manner. So in that case, if you have dedicated bandwidth, what are the timings? What is the repetition frequency? If it is best effort, what is the priority?
Ask you a question. You have all these various abilities to switch around various things. Now, I assume at the higher level you decide, right, that much bandwidth should be allocated to this, or what kind of modulation scheme you will use, either for PSK, for PSK, or based on what information is that done?
Okay, now, for example, deciding the modulation scheme and those things, those will be pretty much driven by the standard requirements as well. Like for example, if we have 802.11a doing 6 Mbps, it is going to be BPSK. That is defined by the standard.
Not necessarily. Some of the standards have a latitude of you can use all different things. The reason I ask, because we on NLG, we know what we do. On every packet we send like pilot or bacon probably here, right? And we receive back another parameter, which is known as a CQI, channel quality indicator. And we look at that value, it gives us an idea of how good the channel is, and based on that we pick. Like the channel is very good, I can go to higher modulation and get something like that. I'm sure over time you guys will think about that.
And exactly, these kind of features, we want to support those in a programmable manner, and that's why we are designing.
That's exactly that.
Exactly. That's our goal.
That's
Who's
exactly.
going to do the software part is going to be another student or another person.
No, but some part has to be the hardware which will direct the
Yes.
software. How to help?
Yes. So
That's
yeah.
the point.
So that's why we are trying to provide a uniform interface, the
Yeah.
API interface. So okay, now the actual control mechanisms. So essentially, these are OS-like operations.
Yeah, I guess what I think Tapan is saying, and what maybe is not fully clear, is where do you draw a line between what is programmable, sort of like when you configure it, what is programmable on the fly, and what is the trade-off of what you use?
Oh, okay. So, okay, actually we can even change our the protocol that we are using. We can change it on a per packet basis.
That's correct, for sure.
Like even with our hardware, we can do it. Obviously, that will have some latency and some.
Yeah. And overhead too. I
Yes.
mean, restriction.
So we have in-band signaling. We have a tag that goes with the packet.
Yes.
With several modulations.
Yes.
So it's there.
Yes, we can change it. Okay, so the control mechanisms essentially the control mechanisms are nothing but some kind of producer to consumer interactions. Okay, so I just go through this once quickly. So it's like there could be multiple ready tasks at this producer to be executed. Based on the scheduling policy, one of them will be scheduled. Before it can actually begin execution at the processing engine, all its command information that we discussed earlier is all residing in the task descriptor. So the command information where the data is, so on and so forth, has to be fetched. And then, so this is like a context switch, and the processing actually begins. After the processing is done, this is a very unique thing about our work, is that immediately after the processing is finished, we free up the processing engine to take up a new task. And all the following control operations are offloaded to hardware. That's how we have better utilization. We claim to have better utilization, and we will see the performance results after that. So after the processing is done, you have to actually identify who is the consumer, who needs the output data. Okay, and that could actually change depending on what the result of the processing is. After the consumers have been identified, you should check whether, oh, is it safe to move the data? So this is like some kind of a data consistency check. You don't want to overwrite data. Are there enough buffers available there to write things and things like that? After that is okay, then you actually pass the data. Okay, so we have local memories with data passing. We do not have a centralized memory with cache-like operation. We could actually have that because we always, everywhere we operate with global memories, global memory addresses. So we are not architecturally restricted to having this kind of organization.
So why do you need to check whether it's safe to move data in the middle? Because you do not have some registers or like internal memory to hold data first. Every time that you move data, you actually move to a permanent, let's say, place.
But it depends, like, okay, after this processing engine has finished its work, till it has finished its work, it does not know where it should move the data. So he has to keep it locally. Because the consumer could depend actually on the result of the output.
Oh, I see.
And we have, that's why because we want to resolve some kind of if-else conditions. And that we do based on some kind of we have a vector-based approach that communicates between the processing engine and the actual control mechanisms. I'm not going to go into the details of the implementation and those things. So, but we have some kind of mechanism for doing it. That's why that is all part of who the consumer is, identifying who. That's why we cannot directly move the data, but we can do it in a speculative manner, and that's going to be part of the future work, as I discussed. Okay, so okay, so where I was, okay, that the data has been passed. After the data has been passed, you actually are there any more dependencies? So basically, this is the synchronization check, where if it is a joining type of a task, is there anyone else who has to provide the data? And then if that is cleared, we finally queue it up in the ready queues for the consumer, and all these things are happening in parallel. The consumer is executing some tasks, the producer is executing some tasks, and all these control operations are also happening. Everything is overlapped for much better utilization.
So the BAP is implemented in the hardware, right?
Yes, and that is what this work has done, implementing that in hardware in a shared manner, which will be shared across multiple of these processing units.
So like there is no centralized hardware where the BAP is happening, or is it like a distributed way?
I'll come to that.
Okay.
So there is no situation like deadlock because you do not move back, right? The order is always like one.
It's always a directed acyclic graph. Okay. Now we come to the implementation aspects of this. So first we work on a distributed approach, a completely distributed approach. So here you can see that each of these functional units contains the processing engine as well as the hardware for the VFP control, which is the OS-like operations. And all the task descriptors are over here. The synchronization tables have to obviously be in a central place because they are for synchronizing, so anyone will have to have access for them. So this is what our approach was first. We built this, but there are issues with this. The very big issue is that the virtual flow pipelining controllers are very high hardware complex. Like they are almost 25,000 gates.
That's not very high.
But it is high because 25,000 gates is going to be per processing engine. And when you think of this from maybe base station implementation point of view, you might want to have maybe hundreds of these, and it is going to be very, very huge. Because this is not restricted to terminal devices. And the second thing is, that it becomes maybe 100 times overhead for some simpler keys like encoders are very somewhat smaller hardware. So for that it becomes like it is not good. Second thing is that because it is totally distributed, all communication, everything is happening over the common interconnect, and it causes a bottleneck. Even if you do resolve the bottleneck issue, the bigger problem is that accessing a common interconnect is a high latency operation. It takes almost 10 to 15 clock cycles, and for maybe you just want to update a particular semaphore over there. For that, spending 10 to 15 clock cycles is going to kill your latency and in fact even the throughput because you can't overlap that operation with something. So our approach, new approach is that we are going to have a clustering based organization. So the aim is to share the VFP controller across some multiple processing engines, and that is going to have some kind of a limit. So we have multiple clusters of those. So it's like having distributed clusters which are sharing the VFP controller. But then the challenges are, first of all, we have to design a shared VFP controller which can handle all these multiple processing engines. And okay, how many it can handle, those questions. Secondly, we would want to take care of producer-consumer interactions which could happen across clusters, those kind of things. Then who takes responsibility? Which VFP controller takes responsibility? And those kind of things.
So I guess like just make sure you emphasize that all this work, including the prior work, was not here.
Yes, yes.
You forgot to put it in explain.
Actually, I did.
You should mention also.
Yeah. Okay. So all this work was done mainly. Khan led the architecture for the distributed part, and as you can see, a lot of us were a part of this architecture.
It was so small.
Okay, so the shared VFP controller, that's what this is. You don't have distributed controllers. We are going to have it in a shared place. The challenge is to still maintain some kind of performance efficiency. Otherwise, this will just be like a software controlled approach where we had a single processor handling multiple.
So if you distribute the BFP compared to a shared one, you take a latency hit if you do a.
In fact, we improve latency to when the interactions are limited to a cluster, we improve latency. In fact, earlier producer to consumer interaction took more than 250 clock cycles.
So why don't you do it hierarchical way? Like you have some part shared, some part distributed.
I'm coming to that.
Okay.
I'm coming to that.
He didn't like the word hierarchy.
Oh, he doesn't like the word hierarchy.
I mentioned that a few times. No, it's cluster.
Yeah.
No, and
Okay, fine.
the thing is that even though it looks hierarchical right now, it is not restricted to hierarchical interconnect. You can have a mesh and still have that kind of cluster. So it is not restricted to a hierarchical approach.
That's what he said.
But conceptually, the hierarchical means you're sharing the responsibilities between.
Okay.
So that is not a structural concept; it's a functional.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Now sharing the VFP controller. Earlier the synchronization tables and all the scheduling descriptors were required to be accessed across the interconnect. Now because the VFP controller is shared, you can just have it local. And now the accesses are just maybe a couple of clock cycles of latency rather than 10 to 15 clock cycles. The other thing is that these task descriptors, if you remember, they had information regarding the task execution and the task sequence. Now we move the task sequence of the task flow information to a central place because identification of the consumers and that part is all going to be managed by this centralized VFP controller. But we still keep the context switching hardware and context switching information as distributed. That's because once a task has been scheduled, you don't really want anything else to stop it or delay it, or any unpredictable things happening after a task has been scheduled, because a lot of things have been taken into consideration before scheduling the task. Now, actually, solving the problem of or improving the performance. So we identified that the control mechanisms of virtual flow pipelining actually exhibit parallelism. So essentially, if you can see, this is processing engine 1. These are the required. No, this is still at a slightly higher level. I have put down the blocks. There is more breakup, but for clarity purposes, the things that are offset are not really done by the shared AFP controller. For example, the context switch we saw, it was distributed, and the actual processing obviously happens on the processing engines. And the data transfers are also managed by multiple DMA engines, which I will, when I talk about the microarchitecture, we can look at that. So essentially, if you have a second processing engine, it can happen in a pipeline fashion. And this is the parallelism that we will be exploiting. So we don't know how many we can support, but we will do some kind of analysis based on simulations in the end to look at that kind of number. So we can exploit this kind of parallelism. So, so the actual microarchitecture based on this explanation of this parallelism. So we have some kind of an asynchronous buffered pipeline. Asynchronous because these are not like one clock cycle each or fixed clock cycle that is going to pass every this thing. So, so we need some kind of elastic buffers in between, and you can think of if this guy finishes slightly faster than.
Or 5 something like that.
Yes, exactly. It is a 5.
What is the five?
Yes, it is 5. So all this, the final queue is made in a separate color because the task scheduling queues are different, because they are sorted based on what the priority is, what the bandwidth requirement is, and so on and so forth. And you can see that DMA engines, there are multiple of them, so data transfer will be delegated to them, and you can have this thing. So as you can see, that at a particular time instant, multiple processing engines could be engaged in different stages of this microarchitecture. At some other time instant, it could be some other engines. So essentially, this is we are exploiting, or we are having explicit hardware parallelism, as opposed to just a RISC processor, which is probably doing some kind of pseudo parallelism, which will not have this kind of performance. So we claim to have better performance, and we will the results will probably.
Can you explain the red bullet from there? I don't quite understand what you're trying to
Okay, so
capabilities. You may want to put the word the risk architecture based.
okay, I'm
Sorry
sorry.
about it. Just
Okay. So basically, what I mean is that now suppose a single RISC processor was catering to multiple processing engines, okay, and it had requests for doing multiple things, like maybe scheduling a task and maybe doing some kind of maybe identification of consumers. What at the most it can do is it can have multiple threads which will be sharing the hardware, but they will be sharing that hardware not in an explicit manner, right? Because thread level parallelism will be
It will
like,
be sequential.
yeah, and it will be in a sort of a time share manner.
Yeah.
So it is not exactly explicit parallel.
Yeah.
So this is really the key point. I think is identified that there is the operations in this runtime control that you can perform concurrently for multiple engines because they are different. So he's exploiting the pipelining nature.
Yeah, but yeah. Okay.
In fact, there is more pipelining within each of these blocks that has been exploited, but I'm not showing all that. It is for the
Who does that? The Jantika does the risk.
Oh, nobody tells about their detailed
Oh,
microarchitecture.
Hard to know.
Yeah, nobody. Everyone just has some numbers, and whenever performance is bad, they will not even mention those things.
What we know is basically that they are handling the tasks of the size of 4,000 clock cycles and
Yes,
above.
I'll come to that when we are discussing the results. And they are resolving data dependencies in hardware, but not control dependencies.
So for the task scheduling, basically you have multiple tasks sometimes sitting in that queue, the blue queue.
Yes. And like there will be we have fixed bandwidth allocation. So there in that case we have timestamp based scheduling. Then we have multiple, like basically we have something called as synchronous queues and asynchronous queues.
So basically the task processing beyond that point, will that still be pipelined or that's like a single chunk of task?
Yeah, you can look at it as a single chunk because it is going to be but the thing is that okay, a different processing engine can engage that part of the hardware
So
independently.
that's a dedicated hardware.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Oh, that
dedicated
makes
hardware.
sense.
So each PE architecture, does it have all those functionality in it? Like your IFFT?
No. It's heterogeneous. So one PE will do only multiple lengths, multiple streams of FFT.
Okay.
One processing engine could do multiple
You program
encodings.
that
Yes.
one.
And in fact, those processing engines will then, like, you have to design those specifically. That is another challenge.
Let me tell you one more thing. Obviously, that's the sequences. However, you didn't draw the timeline because it could happen that sometimes you have to stall the pipeline.
Yes,
because
yes.
the
There
other
are
part-
a lot of things involved. Now, for example,
Yeah.
if there is a particular consumer who does not at all require a data transfer, then I will not even go through this part. This guy writes directly into this queue. There are all those things happening. Now, I cannot detail
No, I
everything.
understand.
Understand.
Interesting. Yeah.
So control communication. Okay, now because we have a shared VFP controller, we have to introduce concept of IDs because it has to keep track of who is working for, and we have because messaging has to take place and all those things. The other thing is if the communication between the processing engines and the VFP controller still happened over the interconnect, it will have similar problems of long latency. Like for example, just transfers of 1 or 2 words would take 10 cycles of latency. So the solution we designed a very simple bus-based interconnect only for control messaging. And these are very customized buses. And they're very simple because they are uplink or downlink type of like one-to-many or many-to-one type of communication. And they are very customized ports. So that is why you don't really have to interpret, okay, what's coming in and then decide what to do on it. It's you directly pick it up and do. So it's like maybe maximum of 2 clock cycles of latency involved. So actually, we have to define all these uniform interfaces and these uniform messages. What should be the contents of those messages and those kind of things, like pointers passing and those kind. So again, coming back to the SOC organization, essentially it does the same thing what I mentioned earlier. Just added the interconnect part of it. But then the question is, what if producers and consumers are in different clusters? We have to manage that as well. So suppose producer and consumer are in separate clusters. Which virtual flow controller takes responsibility? How do we go about doing this? So just reviewing or taking a look at the earlier pipeline for the VFP controller. This is the sequence of operations.
Do you do anything to try to put them in the same cluster?
Oh yes, the goal would be to minimize your intercluster communication.
Right.
Yes.
So what kind of mechanisms can help there?
Oh, there first of all you have to very well analyze your wireless protocols and workloads, and based on that, because this is at design time, right? This is a design time decision.
Oh, I see.
This is not.
You are basically focusing on if this happens, how do you
Yes, and it can like suppose even if we decide to minimize it and we decide to have a transmitter in one cluster, a receiver in one cluster. Okay, even then you have to have some kind of communication between transmitter and receiver, like maybe say sending the ACK frame or something like that. So, so we want to maintain this kind of symmetry or consistency with this structure and everything. So we decided that the consumer side will take responsibility because most of the data structures, the control code, and all that is going to reside over here, wherever the consumer is. So if you look at this, this is just the similar pipeline, only it is distributed across the VFP side for the the producer side and the consumer side. Okay, and if this kind of a scenario occurs, we identify it using the IDs that we have because we have some kind of cluster IDs, and within the cluster IDs we have FU IDs.
Yeah, just coming back to Yang Yong's question, I think like, you know, in this series of masterpieces and what we've done right and all that, we focus mostly on the architecture, right? We haven't focused so much on, okay, let's look at these protocols, you know,
Sure,
which are common functionalities, you know, how to sort of, you know, now he built the architecture, now somebody should sit down and sort of figure out.
Yeah, so algorithms, how do you minimize that?
So basically the goal is that we have some kind of hardware ready for someone to experiment.
Right,
and
right.
things like that.
You need to have that capability.
So we have a message passing happening across the interconnect. So this guy will this block will identify. So only this is the block which actually knows that this is an intercluster communication and not an intra-cluster communication. And we have an outgoing mailbox scheme where he just posts a message and things like that. So we don't want to stall anyone and things like those. So and finally at this end, at the consumer end, when this block starts processing the message, he doesn't even know that this message has come from another cluster. For him, all the processing happens in a very symmetric manner. The only change happens when the message goes to the DM engine and actually data has to be moved from here to here. But then again we use global memory addresses, so for the DM engine also it actually doesn't matter because he just uses the address that is the global address. So basically we minimize any kind of back and forth. So the main thing is that we had to try and minimize any kind of back and forth communication, which we manage by having this scheme and just having a single message go through. And the single message is like 4 words or something. So implementation, we implemented this hardware, the whole thing in system-Verilog. Our interconnect was AMP by AXI based interconnect, which is almost the de facto standard. The verification was done as part of Akshay Jog's work, which was using an open verification methodology. How we synthesized the platform meaning the VFP controller, all the interfaces for the FUs and the interconnect, except for the processing engines. And you can see that the hardware overhead is like 114K gates for the shared scheme, whereas the earlier distributed scheme for supporting 8 processing engines needed approximately 200K gates. So we have saved almost 43% of hardware, which is going to translate to power savings. Okay, so one, you can say, sort of weakness of this work is that we have not exactly analyzed power numbers, but that is because we did not have the tools to do that.
Where did you implement this in FPGA?
No. This was I synthesized using DC.
Synopsys design.
Yeah, synopsys.
Why don't you do it in an FPGA? You will get all this information.
Yeah, but I didn't have time.
Oh, and then let me tell you one more thing. I mean, area is not an issue today. It's the power is the issue.
Yeah, but area is going to translate into power.
I understand. I do understand. And then what do you do? And if you do it in FPGA, they have all bunch of tools there where you can get just like the power. So when you are optimizing, if I won't optimize the area, I go and optimize the power.
Yes.
And even if that, I end up with a little bit higher area.
Yes.
He is going to California when he comes back next.
Next. So he might not come back after a year.
So performance analysis. So before we actually analyze something, let's look at what are the metrics or what kind of things that we are going to analyze. So one is the utilization of the processing engines, meaning what is the percentage of time that they are doing actual data processing and not waiting idle or doing some kind of control processing. So that is the main goal of our scheme, to maximize that. So you can look at the VFP scheme overhead as just a complement of the P utilization. Another thing is the VFP idle time. Basically, the controller, we are going to analyze how much time it is idle. Based on that information, we can somewhat decide how many processing engines we can load onto this VFP controller. And finally, we look at the throughput numbers, which is like a measure of the task switching capacity of the scheme. Okay, so this first plot here is for the utilization of processing engines. You can see processing engine utilization against increasing sizes of tasks. Okay, so more number of clock cycles, and these are plotted for different number of processing engines loading the VFP controller, or you can look at that multiple different numbers of processing engines per cluster. Okay, and this impact is measured without like we are not considering the impact of data transfer. For example, the data output for every task was made just one word. Okay, because we wanted to isolate the impact of data transfer and just focus on what is the impact of the VFP scheme and the impact of sharing the VFP controller. So as you can see that, for example, 8P is sharing a VFP controller can pretty efficiently, like around 80% utilization for task sizes of maybe 200 clock cycles, which is in the ballpark of wireless protocol processing. And the other work which is done by the people in Germany, they in their papers they don't talk about tasks less than 2000 cycles. So we can probably just assume that maybe they are not able to support tasks less than that.
So then let me ask you a question. Let me see whether I can understand correctly. During this like a linear ramp up time, which seems to me your utilization is linearly growing.
Mm-hmm.
That means the inter-P communication is not affecting with that much.
uh, because your
The
the
task
time
size is small.
as the task size goes on increasing,
Yeah.
the controller gets more time to handle all these
I understand.
processing
So
tasks.
as you go higher,
Yeah.
you see it's almost saturating.
Yes,
right
and in
there.
fact, after a particular cutoff point, you can see that supporting 14 processing engines or supporting 8 processing engines just gives you same kind of performance because
Because of interpersonal.
yes, is because you have enough time to manage any of them. So impact of sharing is nullified basically, and which we can look at from the next plot here. If you if this is a plot, if no, this is a plot of this, this is a plot of the VFP controller idle time against task lengths again. Same simulations as the previous one, but different data plotted. So you can see that if you are sharing 14 processing engines on one thing, you're really the VFP controller is really busy for task sizes for maybe up to 200. Only after that it starts getting freed up. So if you want to support task sizes of maybe 150 clock cycles, you cannot or you should not go for 14 Ps in a cluster. Okay, so someone has to do this kind of analysis. Okay, what is actually the generalized requirement of wireless protocols? How do we, what will be our decision?
The thing is that if your task is small, you should not go to 14 PE, right? Because most of your hardware will be wasted.
It will be very busy. The VFP controller will be very busy.
Oh, that's idle time. Okay.
Yes, that's idle time.
Oh, I thought that was like busy time. Okay.
It's idle time, so it's almost very busy over. And you can see that it's
Why is it very big? I didn't.
because we are sharing the controller, right?
Yeah.
So if there are more number of processing engines, he's getting a lot of requests
Okay.
to do the things
Because from all of them, each one of them.
from each one of them.
So that's an overhead, really.
Yes, exactly.
There's some sort of like trade-off, you know, like the way you present it sounds like I should take all short cycle tasks together in one hierarchy. On the other hand, you're thinking, oh, maybe I should get all of the ones that use the same memory, kind of like, you know,
No,
some
that's not what
functionality. Which way do you think is the good way? Like if I have like 20 tasks and these are short tasks, short cycle tasks, these are long cycle tasks, or should I?
For the long cycle tasks, then you should have maybe you should have one more processing engine. Then you have to do some kind of dynamic load sharing and all those things over there. Maybe if there is a particular like maybe MMSE detection or whatever that kind of thing is, it takes a lot of time. Have two engines for that, so that effectively you're having its processing time. So it's like you're dynamically.
Right, so your suggestion is to work on the PE structure, right?
Yes. So for achieving this throughput, there are three areas that have to be worked on. One is the control schemes that we have done over here. Second area is memory organization and how you have your memory schemes. Third is the actual interconnect. So these two memory and interconnect things, they are orthogonal to our work. Like they can be independently optimized, improved without affecting what we have done. So that is a separate domain of work.
Okay, so let me ask you one more question. So, as your task cycle is growing,
Yes.
you can see the idle time is coming down.
Idle time is increasing.
Oh, yeah, idle time is increasing.
Yes. So you are having more idle time. So you can more reliably
Because-
support more tasks.
So if I ask you, like, based on this, what you present,
Uh-huh.
what is the figure of merit between two architectural schemes? The idle time and the throughput?
Oh, actually, okay. So there are two main things, right? Throughput and latency.
Yeah, but idle time doesn't say anything about latency.
Oh yes, this I have presented here to have some kind of an idea of how scalable our shared VFP controller architecture is. That is the goal of this slide.
Yeah, that's right.
Maybe depending on the average task size, we can have the idea how many engines we can support and all.
And I have tried to do analysis on the lines of or on the similar metrics that these papers had, so that we could have some kind of comparison. So as you can see, the OSIP people, they to support 8 Ps sharing the same controller, they have to have task sizes of 5,000 cycles, whereas we can do it with like 120 or something. But then there is actually a slightly processor-based approach, so there are like trade-offs, but we don't need that kind of programmability. Okay, now looking at the impact of data transfer. Now these are again plots similar to the first plot that we saw, utilization against task length, but with increasing amounts of data transfer. So, and this is plotted only for 8P clusters because otherwise it will get cluttered. And 8P clusters is a good number because many wireless protocols can fit into 8Ps. Okay, so as you can see, okay, it is plotted as a ratio of task transfer time to task length time. That is because there is a very strong correlation between task processing time and data transfer. Because if you have more data to process, your task processing time is also going to go high. So they are very closely linked. So we had to, so we decided to plot it in terms of data transfer time again to task length ratio. Okay, where you can think of the worst case as the ratio being 1. So even if the processing was just like reading one thing from the input and writing it to the output, that would probably be a ratio of 1, where no processing is involved, other processing is involved. So as you can see, that we are.
But in that case, your utilization is not is high, right?
Yes, it starts getting impacted. Yes, and other than that, it is not at all impacted because we have very good overlap. Okay, maybe I have a backup slide. Okay, so we have these ping pong regions for the output. So whenever processing engine finishes its work, it writes to the ping region and does not wait for anything. It'll take up a new task and start writing it to the pong. By the time it finishes that task, it needs the ping region free. So if you think of this, then the data sizes are smaller than the task processing sizes. In that case, very good overlap is possible. Like this guy generated this data which is being transferred here. Parallelly, you are processing the other task, and everything is happening very nicely, no gaps, high utilization. Here, data transfer time starts increasing. What happens is that this processing generated this task which is being transferred over here, but because it is taking long enough, although the second task processing is over, it cannot take up the third one because data transfer, there is no buffer free, and generates a gap, reduces utilization. So essentially, our overlapping is very good, and we are able to minimize the impact of data transfer very well. So this is like P throughput. So this is essentially the switching capacity of the VFP controller. So this is for coming up with these numbers, we assumed a normalized frequency of 100 megahertz. Okay, we are definitely going to have higher than that. So what this essentially means is that one processing engine can complete tasks at the rate of probably something like 60K for task sizes of 150. So this is like a measure that usually a person who's programming the protocol, he needs this kind of information to decide how many processing engines he needs and that kind of things.
So can you comment on the data sort of requirement, the memory requirement, all that? Like if you know, if you were given a lot of leverage, what would your design coordinates be there? Should you have a lot of registers, or should you
Actually, having a lot of memory is not really that much helpful because, in fact, it could hamper your latency a lot. Now, suppose you decide to have big memories and work on big data sets. That is going to take more time every stage.
How do you distinguish memory and register area? I mean, like, if I say memory, I also mean maybe I'd like to have a huge 256K register space inside versus off DMA kind of stuff.
I'm sorry, I don't know.
Is it different? Can you have register space?
Register space is more like local thing, right? It will be within the processing engines. You will have register spaces.
Yeah.
And
if I told you you can have a huge register space, would that be?
Yeah, they're latency.
but that is not feasible at all.
Oh, okay, that's what I'm asking.
It is
What is
feasible
feasible?
I understand, but it will be extremely expensive in terms of, yeah, but your latency will definitely go down, no doubt.
Yes,
because
and
external
plus
load-
that has to be done. You're talking about a centralized big register thing. It has to have multiple ports. That is nothing of that is at all feasible.
Well, you know, coming back to Tapan, you know, he says area is not a problem.
Yeah.
But power is the problem, and
Is
power.
that power is the problem?
Yes,
That's what I'm asking.
in the future.
It is a cost, no doubt.
So
And-
registers spend too much power.
It could, unless you take, yeah.
Yes, and register is going to be more area compared to the memory, and that's why it's going to leak more. Everything is more. The power problems, even if you say area is not a problem, power and area are tied up.
Correlated.
Yes.
So what would you do is, first criteria is you have to meet the latency requirement. Without that, you are functionally not good.
Yeah.
And then you see what I'm optimizing. Power is the higher priority than the
Yes,
area,
yes.
right? And power is the,
Yes,
used to be other way
Yes,
around.
if we can have still more area and still have cutoff schemes, we can have dynamic frequency scaling, dynamic voltage scaling, those kind of things. All that I'm going to mention in the future.
Yeah.
Well, the reason why I'm asking that question is because these applications are so time consuming. Such latency is so important.
Yeah, it is.
You shouldn't, this card, even thinking about.
Even though it's more expensive, I mean, that's the only way of meeting the latency.
Right,
Nothing to do.
exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, a suggestion.
Uh-huh.
Usually that's not how you present throughput.
Okay.
Because it looks like, usually if your task size goes up, your
Uh-huh.
system throughput goes up. But the way you're presenting is opposite, because usually throughput is mentioned in
Data.
number of bits
Yes, yes.
per second instead of number of tasks.
Yes.
Okay, so
Okay.
this
Okay,
is
I'll consider that.
counterintuitive.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so real life application. So as part of Madhura's work, what she did was that she used this platform that we designed, integrated the processing engines required for 802.11a like OFDM transmitter, and we did simulations, and we were very successfully able to support in terms of throughput. We had problems. We have problems with the latency, but throughput wise we were able to support 6, 12, 24 Mbps, and in fact we could have supported higher rates as well, but we were restricted because our encoder that we had was doing only 1x2 encoding. We did not have a 3x4 encoder and this thing. So that's what.
So which one is the bottleneck here in terms of latency?
Modulate.
I-50.
Modulate.
The modulate.
And that is because maybe our design was not that good.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe I don't know which one. Probably it could be I-50 like you were saying.
Yeah.
Yes, but
I-50 is this
Yes.
the problem. This is the, I guess you guys got it last time I was here. You got it from Xilinx, right?
Yes.
It's kind of optimized for them.
yes, it's one pipeline. So you get one
So
cycle
you
per
right,
second.
right after I-50, the modulator is the next time.
Yeah.
A modulator is kind of mapping anyway.
Yeah, but it has to then operate at bit level. right?
Absolutely.
But you can still parallelize those things.
Sure.
Maybe we did not have a design that did that.
Yeah. You want to do it functionally correct, then you worry about.
Yes. So that is an orthogonal domain.
Yeah,
where you
yeah,
can
yeah.
optimize your
Yeah,
processing
yeah.
engines. Okay, so conclusion is that the clustering based approach has provided a good balance. 8P clusters, which is a good number for wireless protocol processing, is being supported. Can support like clusters of almost 120 clock cycles. Future work point of view is the speculative producer-consumer transfers. So, if you remember, all our consumer identification and those things, the if-else control dependency resolutions happened only after the data processing was all over. Maybe we could do that in a speculative manner and start processing data earlier, as Professor Song earlier mentioned. And this could be very successful because the if-else resolution requirement is pretty low when it comes to wireless protocol processing. Then we need to have more power control features. As I mentioned earlier, the weakness of this work is that we have not exactly analyzed power numbers because of unavailability of tools. And obviously, we would want to implement this on an FPGA. Implementation hardware gives anyone more confidence, and implement a more diverse protocol flows and see the performance. Those kind of things.